to another MSP event. If you're new here, welcome. We're super excited to talk about this topic today. But before we begin, we'll let folks trickle in, and we love to start things off with a little fun icebreaker. I love to know, Pete and Mike, what is your favorite go-to snack these days? And we'll kick
Mm,
things off with Mike.
Mike.
My wife, which is weird to say because I just got married, got these
Woo!
Trader Joe's maple pancake flavored puffs, and I've been addicted to them. So it's whatever's in front of me, but this is what I've been eating the last couple days.
Yum.
I think my love hate favorite. What's the love hate version of favorite? Favorite least favorite is the peanut butter filled pretzels. Little
Oh,
like pretzel nuggets. Oh man, we have them at the office. I'm here at Atrium's office right now, and like we have them, and like I have to exercise like all of my self control not to just like savage those. So I just drink more coffee, which is like totally helpful, right? Ange, what's your go to right now, yo?
I'm very obsessed with Boom Chica popcorn. I'm not sure if anyone has that in the US,
Mm,
but they're found in like Safeway in Canada. And the
mhm,
flavor that I'm really obsessed with lately is the sea salt dark chocolate caramel flavor. It's great.
mhm,
Kim, you're
sounds
from
amazing.
Toronto. Hopefully you see it in your nearest Safeway or what other
Yeah,
grocery stores are there.
where are people calling in from? I'm in SF. Drop it in the chat, yeah, folks.
Yeah, let us know where you're calling in from. We always love to know where our community is calling in from. Awesome.
NYC.
All right, so let's get started. Today's topic is Taming the Chaos, Mastering Second Level Sales Leadership. But before we begin, I'm going to say a few words about modern sales pros. Today's event is brought to you by the team at MSP. Hello, everyone. My name is Angelica. I'm one of the community event managers at Modern Sales Pros. And for
Hi,
those of you who are
Ange.
Hello. I'm based out in Vancouver, Canada. And for those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they may not know about. We do this through live sessions like the one you're at today. We also have an awesome online forum and our quarterly summits, which we had one quite recently. But if you're not a part of MSP, you'll be invited to join right after this event. Now, before I pass it off to Pete, some quick housekeeping notes. Yes, this event is being recorded. So if you have a colleague or friend that couldn't make it today, don't worry. This event is going to be recorded as well as Pete presentation will be up on the MSP website before the end of day. Second, if you have a question for Pete and Mike, be sure to use the Q&A function at the top right-hand corner or leverage the chat and let us know where you're calling in from. Now, enough about me. I'm going to pass it off to Pete to say a few words about Atrium, and then I'll come back for a wrap up.
Thank you, Angelica. Appreciate it. Hey, folks. So my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm pumped to be here today with our my illustrious colleague Mike Hoffman, talking data-driven sales leadership. So for folks who are not familiar with Atrium, we make what we call data-driven sales management software. It's software that helps sales organizations, sales managers, leaders, second level leaders, et cetera, use metrics to improve team performance. And so the way that Atrium does that is by continuously monitoring dozens and dozens of KPIs and then proactively alerting managers and leaders and operations when something is off with their reps and their teams and so on. And so what this means is that managers are able to get to coaching insights faster, change rep behavior for the better, and improve that performance and win. And so one of the cool things about Atrium is it takes about 2 minutes to set up a free account. So if folks want to do that, you're welcome to do so. So let's talk a little bit about who is going to be talking second level sales leadership here today. There's me. I'm the less important one, so I'll get me out of the way. My name's Pete Kazanjy. As I noted earlier, I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Prior to Atrium, I started and sold a recruiting software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And that's really where I went from being a like product like business generalist founder to being a first sales rep, sales manager, and sales leader at TalentVin. And then subsequent to that, I wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and I started Modern Sales Pros. But importantly, one of the coolest things of like all the work I've been doing is I get to hang out with awesome sales leaders, like very almost modern sales leaders, if you will, like my friend Mike here, who goes by Hoff for folks who know him, a fixture in the New York City sales community for sure. Mike, maybe you can share a little bit with folks what you spend your time doing at Spring Health, and then maybe a couple of the roles before that, so they're just kind of familiar with your familiar with the sales motions that you're familiar with.
Absolutely, and I always love to hang out with you, Pete. And why I love this topic specifically, I remember at my previous company, CB Insights, that was the first time I got promoted to second line managing managers, and I thought
It's chaos.
it's there's so much resources for frontline and then the CRO, but if you're in that in between, managing managers for the first time is tough. Like anything
Yep.
else, you get the experience, but I was looking for resources, so I love this topic.
Yep.
As I've thought a lot about it. But I'm currently VP of Sales at Spring Health, so overseeing a segment of our sales team, overseeing a few sales managers there. We're a mental health company providing mental health benefits to employers to offer to their employees. Rapid growth, so tools like Atrium really help. And again, before that, I was at CB Insights, another high growth company, and really grew the muscle of managing managers, and have been at various SaaS companies before that in different leadership roles.
Yeah, and Mike, like a lot of the, it's funny when my reps do pre-call planning for sales leaders that they're going to talk to. Typically, what they do, one of the things we have them do is like jump all the way back to someone's background, like maybe even like what their first roles were out of college or what they studied in college. And Mike is an extremely data-driven sales leader. Not surprising because I think you did finance undergrad, if I recall correctly,
It did,
right?
yes.
Yeah. So Mike's an awesome modern, data-driven sales leader there. For folks who are interested, we're offering folks a sales nerd hoodie. If you'd like to grab one here, they're really cute. I'm wearing one. They're warm. It's freezing here in San Francisco, but you're welcome to sign up for one for free. All we ask in exchange is a quick chat, a quick discovery chat with with one of our account executives on how you're using data to measure and improve performance in your sales organization. So wonderful. So the topics we're going to talk about today is kind of like there's like the why and then the how. And so we're going to talk about like why you should, as a second level leader, why you should care about data and metrics. And then moreover, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break down what that kind of like buckets into, like specifically what the metrics are, kind of like the core metrics are that you as a second level leader kind of need for yourself, how you can empower your managers. And the second one is like a little bit more like a little bit less intuitive, and something that people oftentimes don't focus on as much. They kind of like get their needs taken care of and they're kind of on their merry way. And then the metrics that you're like are important for monitoring at a rep level, in specific cases where a second level leader would want to be paying attention to rep level metrics, which is a little bit of like a kind of a nuanced situation there, because the second level leader, like you're not in the business of managing reps, but there are some situations wherein it's important to kind of like be bird dogging that there. So we're going to be jamming through some of these slides here, and of course Mike is going to be providing his expertise along the way. So kind of like the overarching thing here is like as a leader, one of the things that is really important for using data is that it helps you as a leader see around corners, and not just from like a forecast standpoint, because like obviously like the forecast only kind of gives you so much visibility. It's stuff that's already piped. It's things that are showing up like maybe this quarter, maybe the next quarter. But then of course there are like leading indicators to that as well. And so the more of those leading indicators that you're paying attention to, the better off you're going to be able to like look around corners and not be surprised by things, and course correct. The second reason why it's really important to use data as a sales leader is that what you like the key to leverage, and I was talking to this actually a third level sales leader yesterday for like a 500 person sales organization, is like the key to be the success as a second level leader is manager empowerment and manager enablement. And the same way that like when you go from being a rep to being a manager, like you are now not a super rep where you're closing deals for your reps. You are now in the business of empowering and making your reps better, like glowing them up. It's just one level above, right? Like you are not a super manager at this point. You're not in the weeds with your kind of pointing out things on different reps or what have you. You're now here to manage, or sorry, to empower and provide leverage to your managers. And so a really powerful way to do that is to make sure that they have the data assets that are needed in order to manage by metric. And so that's like those are kind of the primary reasons why that's really important. So the topics we're going to talk about here is kind of like metrics for the modern sales leaders, metrics for the managers they serve, and then metrics for kind of paying attention to the reps in specific kind of situations there. So with respect to metrics for the leaders themselves, there's a couple of different buckets that we're going to talk about here, kind of like key. This is kind of related to like metrics that you might pay attention to and report out to the board. And certainly you would probably be you want to be paying attention to this in like, like a weekly business or maybe a bi-weekly business review, or certainly at least like a monthly business review. And so these would be things like line of sight revenue, what I like to call revenue next. Right, so not stuff that's like piped yet, but like maybe it's like right before it's going to start getting piped. So there's like revenue centric stuff. Then there's rep productivity things, right? So these tend to be like more like averages. And then there's team level kind of awareness and reporting there. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this. So these are the kind of metrics that you as a sales leader ought to be paying attention to. Now, first and foremost, of course, is going to be things like, wins, bookings, like line of sight revenue. So like forecast, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These would be things like total amount of pipeline currently owned by your team. How maybe a little bit more sophisticated version of that would be like new opportunity inflow, right? So like looking at paying attention to how many ops are in pipe over time is like all well and good, but obviously like inflow will tell you whether or not like that's being refilled, like filled back up again, things like that. Then of course there's forecasting, right? I think that's like not exactly not exactly controversial there. And so that's paying attention not just to total pipe ownership right now or total op ownership right now, but how much pipe is slated to like is piped for different time periods, right? Like, whatever the month or the quarter or the what have you is. So paying attention to like, okay, we've got this amount of ops that are in pipe or this much amount of pipe, but like when is it scheduled to potentially come in? And then doing that on a rep by rep basis there. A more advanced version of that would be, instead of just looking at like that total pipeline ownership, maybe split by forecast category, what have you, on those per time interval basis, would be instead like discounting that based on like historical win rates. This is something that Atrium customers really like. We have a KPI called win rate weighted pipeline. So it's not like weighted pipeline like the like the percentages that people will like arbitrarily put on opportunities in Salesforce or the different stages, but actually discounts it based on the historical win rate of that rep for that stage. And so that can be like a more math-based approach to forecasting there. And then of course, what a really popular thing that organizations like that we work with is essentially like pipeline change, like in quarter there, where we can see like, hey, how much pipe did we enter the quarter with? Where's it gone so far? Then how much is left in the tank? And so these are all these are all kind of like fairly straightforward, right? Like they're metrics for the leader themselves, and oftentimes this is where organizations will kind of stop, and kind of declare victory. Mike, any kind of like comments you'd like to make on this in terms of like how you like to pay attention to what I call like line of sight revenue?
Yeah, of everything you talked about, the thing that I leverage the most is the weighted pipeline based on the close rate of the actual AEs, because
Yeah.
it's not, like you said, the standard 80%, 20%. And this avoided a lot of heart attacks for me this last year, because we have such a cyclical business where we weren't getting decisions in still Q3 or Q4. So in Q2, when it looks like we don't have anything that's going to close, it's okay, because we had a lot earlier based on where we were, that it always showed we were on target. So I think that's, organizations are not looking at actual close rates here, and that's really important.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that organizations, yeah, like I really like Gong's phrasing in this regard. There's like, opinions, and then there's like reality. And I think that by looking at win rate, like historical win rate based um, you know, like productivity there, it can really help you. Like either A, you might have someone who historically has a much higher win rate. And so if you're only looking at his or her pipe and maybe it's a little bit lighter, you might kind of be nervous about that, right? But knowing that like actually this person is nails, like well, they don't miss when they shoot, can help you with that. And then similarly, if you're just doing kind of like, the old school, like, oh yeah, we want like 3x pipeline coverage or what have you, and someone just happens to have like a really poor historical close rate, well, that'll get like, unfortunately, that kind of gets like hidden as you get up to like a manager level or a sales leader level, because maybe you've got 20 reps that are in that make up that number right there. So knowing that that individual rep's low win rate should be discounting their pipe more substantially is something that you might not necessarily see unless that's being calculated for you, being mathed for you. Cool. So then the next thing is like what I like to call revenue next. And so these are going to be things that are going to like kind of coming down the pike, if you will, right? So like new opportunity inflow, and then moreover, of something that you can get that's like more sophisticated there would be like looking at how much pipe is reaching a certain stage. That can be a very powerful thing for understanding how, like, new opportunity inflow is all well and good, but how much is making it to stage 2? How much is making it to stage 3? And this can be a helpful way of like, of catching potentially if there are issues associated with like all of a sudden like op quality deteriorates, like maybe there's a bunch of like ops that are coming in that aren't converting to stage 2. We'd want to know that, right? We don't want to like just declare victory and say, hey, you know what, everything's cool, we have a bunch of ops that are coming in right now. We want to make sure that like they're making their way along the assembly line as well. And so understanding how many are getting how many ops or how much aggregate pipeline is getting to that stage 2, stage 3 can be really helpful. Additionally, and even if SDR or kind of marketing doesn't go into sales leadership, we really want to have eyes on where those opportunities would be coming from, right? And so if you think about where opportunities come from before they get on the AE's calendar to start out, like obviously there's stage 0 ops, which is nice, but where do stage 0 ops come from? Usually they come from SDR engagement in some sort of capacity. So understanding, are we engaging in sufficient levels of account engagement on the SDR team or the marketing team, and not just like aggregate number of accounts, but also new accounts, right? Because Mike, you'll appreciate this as a former finance guy. There's like stocks and then there's like flows, right? Like, we got the number of ops or the number of accounts that we're working, but we always want to make sure that there's like more coming in, like more fresh blood there. Mike, when you think about kind of like quote unquote revenue next, what are your favorite things to kind of pay attention there to, the kind of like the signals before things start getting down pipe, before they start being kind of like line of sight?
It's what you said, like stage evolution. I think so many sales leaders, and what I used to do before leveraging Atrium is I just have a Salesforce report of how many new ops are we getting, and that doesn't answer a lot of questions of like how are we actually progressing pipeline and getting to where we need to. So the report you showed is what I have on my Atrium dashboard of just what's coming in and where are they actually going.
Yep, for sure. Cool. So then this is actually one of the things that I'm super obsessed about. Is we call this like the fingerprint of success. And I think this is something that organizations are a lot more focused on right now, because historically, in a more kind of like capital constrained environment where organizations are really starting to focus in on sales productivity, like kind of the what the average rep looks like, instead of saying, hey, look, as long as the top line, right, as long as top line revenue is growing, or as long as top line opportunity creation is growing, I don't care. Well, the if you need to be more efficient, you need to be paying attention to what this looks like on a per rep, like on a per rep basis, because like that's the fundamental unit of output in your organization is going to be that rep's execution, and moreover, you're paying them that base salary, right? Which is of course turning into those bookings or those opportunity creation. And so what this oftentimes means is making sure that you're paying attention to what that like the averages are on the team. So like as an example, not just saying how many in aggregate new opportunities are coming into pipe, for instance, but on a per rep basis, what does that look like, right? And then moreover, once you have that fingerprint of success here of what the team ought to be looking like, well, then what you can do is you can look at on a per rep basis and see who's where they need to be there or who's not, right? So like in this example right here, we would say, hey, do we see any meaningful trends in terms of new opportunity inflow across the team in aggregate, right? You can kind of see that this is declining over time here. And then moreover, is that across the team? Is that localized? And what you can actually see here is that yes, the new opportunity inflow is declining over time here, but it actually looks like it's fairly concentrated in like these folks down here. And so that this is an example of seeing something and then potentially making a change in order to drive to drive better behavior and get ahead of a problem. So that could be things like new opportunity ownership, that could be things like win rate, right? This is especially important, like your average, you'd want to understand, is something changing in the business? Are win rates going down? Spoiler alert, win rates are going down for a lot of people right now. Are your win rates going down? And then moreover, is that split, like, is that broadly shared across the team? Or are there a set of folks, like as you can kind of see here, are there a set of folks where that win rate is substantially lower than it is for other folks? Because that might tell you that that's where you need to focus your area, like your attention from a managerial standpoint, or potentially offboard those reps because they're not able to like nail the sales motion, and then you can redirect their opportunities to the other reps. And then of course this concept of fingerprint of success can go all the way down to kind of like the nuts and bolts of things like customer facing meeting volume. So the same kind of like concept applies, like what is the average, what do we like, what are the banding, like what are the expectations, and then how does that break out on a per rep basis? How many customer facing meetings do we expect our reps to be having week by week or month by month, and then what does that actually look like in the trailing 30 days or trailing 90 days on a per rep basis there? Mike, when you think about kind of fingerprint of success metrics here for for your managers and for you, what are the things that you like to pay attention to there? How do you kind of use this in your leadership rhythm?
Yeah, I think like the key trick for a second line manager is you can build a dashboard of a few things. You don't want to overload people, but if you have like five or so charts and it goes out every morning to the entire, not every morning, every Monday morning is when we do it to the entire sales org, then the reps are going to be aware what they need to be doing better. Did they have enough meetings? Did they have enough ops progress? That kind of thing. And then as a second line manager, if you see somebody did really well, you can email them directly, and it really motivates them to if they're hearing from a second line manager. But things I would look at are new meetings they had for new ops, also meetings they had on existing ops, what their weighted pipeline is, how that changed, all of those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it also helps frontline managers with their reps knowing that the second line manager has seen it so that they can really dig in and inspect because they're accountable to it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I love that, right? Like just a little bit of like accountability, like fairy dust, right? Just kind of being like sent around there. I'm a big email guy because like I'm old and busted, but like, doing that in Slack can be very helpful as well. Another thing that we find kind of second level leaders want to be aware of is kind of like movements, right? Like when things change, you want to be aware of like what's going on there, because that way like you can intervene and kind of change things. And so this is actually something that's fairly unique to Atrium, is essentially monitoring changes in in metrics, like both at the rep level but also at the team level. And so what you can kind of see here is examples of when Atrium is kind of like waving its hand and being like, hey, by the way, like across your entire organization, the average selling price has been going up. This would be a good thing, obviously. Probably something from a managerial standpoint that we would want to do is, or we'd want to be more aware of, is if ASPs were like going down, as an example, and being able to understand like what the deal is there, and intervene as appropriate. But that might be things like any of the kind of prior metrics we were talking about, like new pipeline ownership or what have you, wanting to understand when something seems like it's shifted. Because of course, if something has shifted, what we wanted, and if it's shifted for the worse, we like to investigate, get to the root cause, and then ideally remediate, if possible there. And so that can be a really kind of like powerful approach there. The second kind of topic I want to get into here, and I think this is like, so oftentimes what will happen is people will like kind of stop in the prior scenario there. They'll like they'll they'll say, hey, you know what, I've got my my aggregate bookings, or my aggregate forecast, or my aggregate new opportunity inflow, across the 30 reps or 50 reps that I'm responsible for. I'm good. And that actually misses a kind of a pretty important thing, which of course is manager enablement, right? Manager empowerment. And so that's what we're going to kind of talk about here today, is or like in this section, is why it's important to make sure that you're providing, like you're enabling and empowering your managers to manage by metric themselves. And we're going to talk about like kind of the how for doing that. And it's essentially the reason why it's so important is because, to quote Gartner here, high performing sales managers are really kind of like the linchpin of successful sales organizations, for a variety of reasons, like higher rep productivity and like higher rep effort. But the big thing really, and Michelle Vazana talks about this in her great book, sales management book, Crushing Quota, is that what they do is great managers take reps that are middling performers and they make them much better. Not like, amazing, like off the charts or whatever, but what they do is they take their, if they have like B minus players, they move them to B plus or A minus. If they have, C plus reps, they move them to B. And so what happens there is by like shifting everybody right on the performance curve just like a little bit, they drive out disproportionate booking success. And so the mechanism, but the problem, of course, is that in order to be great at sales management and be a great sales manager, there's a number of things that managers have to spend their time doing. And so what that means is, like, yes, deal inspection and strategy is important and usually pretty straightforward for organization or for managers to do, but there's a bunch of other things that they actually should be spending their time doing that helps them measure, kind of like measure and coach the human, as opposed to coaching the play, if you will, which is our deals here. And so those are things like, tracking progress towards goals, bringing data into their one-on-ones, monitoring the success of new hires ramp. And then, of course, for folks who are out of ramp, identifying potential issues and then like fixing them. And then the kind of flip to that side is taking the success of top performers and standardizing across the whole team. And so the challenge that we find with our customers is that for the most part, sales managers aren't as enabled as would be preferred, in order to do that. And there's kind of two main reasons there. There's one, if you think about where sales managers come from, they come from being former reps. Oftentimes enablement is really more focused on the rep. and moreover, these managers don't like naturally have kind of like analytical experience, if you will. And then moreover, the kind of the tooling that we provide to them are just kind of like what we like to call walls of charts, right? So things that are designed for analysts and kind of like sales ops and what have you, but being handed to somebody who doesn't necessarily come from the analytics department, doesn't come from the math department, the finance department, et cetera. Um, and so what oftentimes will happen is those managers will just, jump back to kind of what they're used to, which is deals, 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 deal inspection, deal inspection, deal inspection. And so what we what we advocate is that managers should be empowered to have all the KPIs that they are required to measure their team, proactive goal tracking on those like both leading and lagging indicators, and then moreover, early warning, alerting, and kind of like root cause analysis around any sort of performance issues. Mike, when you think about the kind of like operating rhythm stuff that you like to kind of focus your managers on, what are the biggest things there for you guys?
Yeah, it's a lot of things you said. The most valuable skill set of a manager is how they spend their time. And so if like you talked a lot about like being able to improve reps, I always say it's much more valuable to turn a B player into an A player than a C player into a B player. So we talk a lot about
Easier, for
which
sure.
reps easier. And if you have more A players and you lose C players, it's more valuable than being just having a lot of B players. So I talk a lot about that, and I talk about what are you doing to develop your people, and having development skills based off of data is what makes the huge difference. So where are they losing deals in the sales cycle? How are they developing pipeline? Actually doing deal strategy and all that kind of stuff is really important. And to do that, you need a system like what you're talking about here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we can kind of talk about those systems a little bit here, in terms of like operating rhythms. So just before we get into that, one big thing that I like to kind of like to talk about here is the reason why it's really important to make sure those managers are using data and like not in this realm here, is a couple of different things. So like one, if you think about the traditional way that managers try to maybe seek to measure and manage reps, it can be things like riding along on calls. That can be very, I mean, it's important, don't get me wrong, but it's fairly low leverage insofar as, one, like, do you know that you're on the right call for the right rep, right? What particular, and of course, like, usually what that means is that managers are jumping on calls that are like down funnel because they want to de-risk deals. But spending your time, as Mike was just saying, like doing that for high performers that have an extremely high win rate from a proposal or what have you, might be a waste of your time as a manager versus spending that time being on live calls with somebody as you're like for the skills that you're trying to develop. And this only becomes more difficult in a remote environment where you can't like listen to multiple calls happening concurrently. And of course, the worst of the worst is closing deals for being a super rep and kind of closing deals for your reps. Like that's just like not scalable whatsoever. And of course, as noted here, recurring deal inspection is important. Don't get me wrong, but the problem is, and like you can't not do that, right? Because you're helping reps understand like the path through a deal, like, oh, it seems like you're not engaged with this human, or seems like XYZ. That's super important. But in order to understand where the problems are for a rep that you might want to resolve, you need to generalize kind of like the development areas that for a given rep, and kind of like picking that out on a deal by deal basis is extremely difficult to do because you're kind of like looking through a peephole versus using kind of metrics to analyze their sales motion and say, this is the stage where you have this problem, or you have an activity problem across the board. Even though the calls that you're on, that I'm on with you, are quite excellent, you have something that like is a broader, like a more broad problem. And so like those are the things that you'd be able to see via data. So how do you make sure that folks are kind of managing by my data? Well, you make sure that they have an appropriate operating rhythm for that. And so the like usually what an operating rhythm is, or what we like to call a sales management motion, as distinct from a sales motion, kind of sales management motion. It's usually composed of a set of a set of meetings that have a certain agenda, have certain content in them, and usually that content not just doesn't just have like managerial behaviors and kind of coaching behaviors in it, but it also have metrics, right? It has analytics assets in it, and so this is an example of kind of some types of kind of content, right, or like meetings that would compose an operating rhythm. Pipeline review is obviously like that's not super controversial, right? As we were discussing previously, like you're probably going to be doing that. Maybe, but I think what's important there, and like there's the pipeline review, which might just be like stage inspection, close date inspection, amount inspection, things like that. And then that's actually kind of like separate from, or at least I like to have it separate from what I call deal strategy meetings, where it's like like actually debugging what's going on with a deal and talking about potential next steps to help reps understand where they're kind of like hung in terms of navigating. Both of these are distinctly different from a one-on-one, where the one-on-one really should be focused around, this is about like rep behavior. It's not a deal review. Ideally, it should have metrics in it, and then progress on coaching initiatives, and of course like HR topics as well. QBRs, team meetings, etc. All kind of compose a data-driven operating rhythm, and then more. So like this is kind of what that looks like in practice. You would stage out what what the different meetings are on different days. So like this is just like a prototypical example here where this is like a mid-market sales team or commercial sales team where you might have daily stand-ups, and then you have a sales team meeting weekly where you're kind of like looking at various metrics, celebrating prior wins, looking at the week ahead, etc. And then you have pipeline review maybe weekly, and then you have all the one-on-ones for your team members, right? So like all of our one-on-ones here every 2 weeks or so. Like this is just like a prototypical kind of like example there. Your mileage may vary, but then importantly, what you want to have is kind of like a declared agenda for each of those operating rhythm meetings. So like like a data-driven one-on-one is a great example of that. Like you'd want to make sure that you have an agenda for that. This is, and I actually don't think we have a link to this this template here, but maybe Angelica can try to find that and drop it into the chat. But a great way to make sure that you're covering the things that need to be covered is to make sure that you have like an effective declared agenda for them, and then moreover to make sure that you're like not missing topics and you kind of go back and look at things over time. Having like a working document for that can be really effective. This right here is an example of a template for a one-on-one. And so like what that could be is that could be rep topics, topics that the rep wants to bring up, managerial topics, so reviewing the kind of like the existing coaching plan that might be in place, and like back checking metrics there, talking about career development stuff and like potential HR topics as well. But then, by having an agenda and making sure that it's hyperlinked in the recurring meeting invite, you can come back to that and say, oh, what did we cover 2 weeks ago? Oh, this right here, right? And so this would be an example of something that as a manager you would use, but as a second level leader, this is an example of a tool that you would want to deploy to your to your managers to make sure that they're running their one-on-ones in an effective way, because otherwise it might be catch as catch can. Mike, how do you like to structure your one-on-ones with your teams?
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny. I don't know if you've read the book, The Effective Manager, but I give it to all my new managers to read, and they talk a lot about one-on-ones. And what I do is separate the pipeline stuff and the deal review stuff, as you mentioned, from the one-on-one
Yep.
meeting. It's more what's going on with them first, what's on their mind, and then the topics of what I want to do and what I want them to improve on. I think though, from this operating rhythm, I love this. The two that I think probably get overlooked the most aren't what you expect are the bottom two. I
Mm,
find QBR was my favorite exercise to do at CB Insights. I created this whole template of looking back at last quarter, then what's
yep,
going on this quarter, how are you like
yep,
ranking your reps and how are you coaching
yep,
them? And the ones that came with data driven, this is my development skill for each rep this quarter, were the ones that were far ahead from others. So I think
yep.
companies doing that is important. Then call reviews are just not leveraged close to as much. And I find if you have a good call review, the whole team's going to emulate it and it's going to have an immediate impact.
That's a great point, man. Yeah, I think one of our customers here at Atrium is Sales Loft, and they have a thing that they use. I don't know if they still call it this, but like point and laugh. um, right? So just like make it like use it as an opportunity to kind of make it fun, right? Like, hey, bring a great call, bring a not great call, so everyone can kind of listen and be like, hey, like like these are the things that weren't really well in this one right here. Let's generalize that. These are the hiccups right here, and how I want to and how you can avoid them in the future. I actually do have a QBR template that's not in this deck. Unfortunately, I should probably add that in this deck. But yeah, I think QBRs are a fantastic like way to like force yourself to look back and make sure that you just don't kind of get lost in the in the recurring kind of treadmill of the day to day.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like a great forcing function there. And like, good operating rhythms are kind of like fractals like that. Like you don't only want to have the QBR, like you want to be checking in on things on a monthly basis, and then on a weekly basis, probably not at the same level of depth, right? At a less level of depth, if you will. um, but again, kind of making sure that you're paying attention to things that might deteriorate or improve, and are you actually making progress on the things that you wanted to, that you declared an intention to after you exited your quarterly business review. um, and then the other thing too that can be really effective with managers, is setting goals. So there's like creating the operating rhythm here, and then there's the setting of the goal, like setting goals as well. And it's not just like output goals, right? So systematizing, like, hey, here in the Spring Health, mid-market sales organization, or here at the CV Insights sales organization, we have an expectation that for these types of reps right here, you're having this many customer facing meetings. On a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. We expect, this many new opportunities that are coming into your pipe. We expect you to self-source this many opportunities separately. And we expect you, like, of these number of opportunities that are coming into your pipe on a monthly basis, we expect this proportion to get to pilot, or this number to get to proposal. So just setting a set of goals on that. So like a metric and then a time period, and then paying attention to that can be extremely helpful. When you think about the mechanisms by which to do that, um, there's a couple of different things you can do to kind of blend together. One is you can look at historical performance for that team or those sets of teams, and use that as a mechanism to say, hey, this is like what's attainable, like this is what's possible here. The other thing you can do is you can kind of like go bottoms up on that and look at, like, hey, this is how much time there is in a week or in a month. These are the behaviors that we would expect our reps to be doing. So like, I don't know, if you have a sales motion that has, reps filling out a lot of RFPs or what have you, you got to take account for that, right? Like they're gonna have that on their calendar. If you have a more transactional model where like reps really aren't doing that much more between calls, other kind of behaviors between calls, well, maybe that means that they're going to be having more customer facing meetings on a weekly basis. But regardless, what you want to do is kind of take that historical performance, blend in the bottoms up, and then kind of like just draw a line in the sand and then start iterating there. And so these are kind of some examples of what that might look like in practice, where the like for AEs, that for customer facing meetings, I like to measure that on a weekly basis and a monthly basis. But like in general, what you want to do is like set goals on, and measure on kind of the shortest interval that makes sense, right? That's like not noise. So like customer facing meetings, usually a weekly basis is probably makes sense there. I actually do like to measure AE email volume, not because like sending more emails is going to make people like close more deals per se. It just indicates that a rep is engaging in a high level of like customer facing activity, which will be spread across their opportunities. So like paying, just essentially like paying attention to this, like, hey, is the person nice and active on a weekly basis? And then when you pop out to um, monthly basis for things like new opportunity inflow, right? And then, quality metrics like win rate, how much multi-threading is happening, average selling price, those are usually better measured on a longer time interval. And unless you have a very, very, very like a very, very velocity sales motion there. And then the same thing happens on in SDR land as well, right? Like, you just want to set those goals, tied to the appropriate time interval. And then once you have those goals set, then we just got to bird dog them, right? Make sure, hey, are we progressing towards them? Like during the interval. So like in SDR land, they'll be like, hey, it's Wednesday morning. Where are we at on emails and calls for the week? Right. And for AE land, that might be like, hey, it's Monday afternoon. How are we tracking towards our goals for the month, right? And just make sure that we're paying attention to those from a like proactively, so we're not looking at the end of the month or end of the quarter like, whoa, I wish I knew partway through the time interval that this rep was pacing dramatically behind with respect to customer facing meetings or new opportunity inflow, right? Like we want to bird dog that so we're not surprised when we do the QBR. Mike, when you think about setting goals, any sort of tips you would like to recommend for folks there?
Yeah, I just think having standardization is so critical as a second line manager, because you're going to have some managers that were promoted from within, some that were hired externally, some with a lot of experience, some with a little experience. Some are, you're trying to get them out of being super reps. Some are more coachable than others, some are more analytical. And so this gets everybody on an equal playing field and looking at the same thing and rowing in the right direction. So not enough organizations I find that I consult with are doing this.
Yeah, totally. I think what's funny is, and I think maybe this is kind of like it's like second level leader is like secretary, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of true. Like when you like first level managers, um, it's like ideally it's about making the rep better. It's about motivation, coaching, like finding issues in people's sales motion, like raising them up. And then when you're like a second level leader, it's about like documentation, systems. The thing that really hit it for me is when you said standardization. I was like, yep, standardization, right? Like we don't want to have five different folks doing like five managers doing their one-on-ones five different ways, right? We don't want to have five managers doing their pipe reviews five different ways, right? We don't want to have five managers doing their team meetings five different ways. And a great example of that would be like goals. Like, oh, well, on this team, like it's okay if we have 10 customer facing meetings a week. It's like, whoa, that's crazy, because like, the rest of the organization expects like 15, right? Or expects like, 15 to 20. Yikes. Yeah. And so just, for folks, just like a small kind of Atrium advertisement here, this sort of stuff is exactly what Atrium really focuses on. Is like it exists to help managers and the leaders that enable them use metrics to improve team performance. We work with hundreds of organizations to do that. And so generally speaking, our sale, like the customers we work with, see anywhere between 30 to 70% improvements in key metrics that they start managing, like whether they're pipe hygiene metrics, like Jim's talking about here at Gainsight around stuck opportunities and kind of pipe hygiene for the enterprise AE team. They also do a bunch of prospecting measurement as well. Or pipe hygiene, or excuse me, or sales activity stuff like customer facing meeting volume and associated pipe hygiene over at Envoy. The point is that like if you measure something, you can then manage it and improve it. And if you're not measuring it, like it's very difficult to improve rep behavior. And so doing that by metric is the way to do that. So the last kind of section we're going to talk about here is going to be the kind of the rare section or the rare scenario where as a second level leader, you might want to pay attention to rep level stuff. And I know it's a little funny. I was like, Mike and I are sitting here saying like, hey, you're in the business of empowering your managers, making them, like, investing in them, making them more successful, giving them systems, standardization, et cetera. But there are some kind of like high criticality situations wherein you might want to pay attention to rep level behavior, where it's like, it's because it's high criticality, it's worth second level leader um, attention. It's kind of like, trust but verify. So one example of that would be ramping, right? So obviously when reps are in ramp, it's a high criticality time. And so, until they've graduated from ramp, whatever your internal definition of like ramp graduation is, having extra scrutiny on that, both from a booking standpoint, but also from a leading indicator standpoint, like new opportunity ownership, things like that can be extremely important. Um, and this because you want to be able to jump on top of folks if they're having a problem, right? Like, we don't want to wait till month 3, month 6, month 9 to jump on that. We want to be able to get ahead of that earlier on, because it's earlier, like, it's easier to fix things earlier. Either A, offboard somebody who's never going to make it because, like, maybe there's a hiring error, or B, be able to really coach up and fix somebody who might have the capability to get there before they check out, burn out, right? And like, you lose somebody there. So, ramp monitoring is a really kind of like a good example of like a high criticality juncture, at which point second level managers might want to pay attention to things. Like, from an operating rhythm standpoint, like, I guess I'm technically a second level sales leader, even though, like, our sales organization is only like a dozen folks or so. But like a sales leadership team meeting is probably a great place from an operating rhythm standpoint to pay attention to these things. You can just imagine having a section on, like, ramper health, like, where are the rampers at? Bob, you've got 2 rampers. Jenny, you've got 1. Susie, you've got 2. Let's just make sure that we're paying attention there, such that we can get ahead of that and have that, in our operating rhythm meeting there. And so, like, that's not just, negative things. It can also be positive things as well. These are examples right here. These are screenshots out of Atrium. Atrium has a special capability around monitoring the ramps of reps as well. And so, that compares them to folks, their peers at the same point in time. So you can see like this rep right here has started out light with respect to opportunity ownership, and then interestingly was coached to fix that. And you can see that his new opportunity inflow in month 4 here really spiked dramatically in order to help remediate that slow opportunity ownership build there. So this is an example of data-driven sales management in practice. Like, hey, this is not good. Let's fix this. Okay, look, the fix is actually sticking. That's great. We would expect good stuff to come out of this in the future. Mike, when you think about kind of ramping, and I know that you guys have had quite a bit of growth over there at Spring Health, how do you guys make sure that your reps are, like, how do you guys measure the successful ramp of reps there?
Yeah, if there's anything about second line management that's so important is understanding ramp. And so many times I've seen companies overestimate. They think, oh, people will go on quota after 2 months or 3 months and be fine because it works in a spreadsheet. And so both understanding like actual ramp based on data is so important. And then when people are ramping, it's things like pipeline, like accounts touched, weighted pipeline, things like that. But also, are they doing the activities? But then there also are things outside of that we look at, like passing certifications and all that kind of stuff. But the key, if anything, being data driven, look at historical ramp to make decisions on ramp. Don't just make assumptions, because that screws things up.
Yeah, no hand waving, right? I mean, I think what you're describing in general, and this is something that we find our customers are pretty happy about, is like, your historical data has like a bunch of great information if you can get access to it and manipulate it, because like a reasonable amount of historical performance, like, ramps from 36 months ago the sales motion has probably changed, the products change, etc. Ramps from anywhere from like 24 to 18 to 12 months ago. Yeah, there's definitely signal there. From like ramps for the prior ramping cohort, for sure, right? And so like just making sure that you're paying attention to that will give you much more accurate kind of perceptions of like what is achievable, such that you don't end up kind of like missing out, right? Like setting expectations for yourself and like maybe your marketing leaders or your CS leaders or what have you, or your CFO or your board, and then like lo and behold, it turns out it was based on a bunch of malarkey, right? Cool. And then key initiatives. So this is another thing where, again, this is like high criticality. So there might be a specific initiative in an organization around, blah, like something. So an example of this that we're seeing pretty frequently right now is, in organizations that we work with, is a lot of like marketing budgets are being reduced, and as such, there's like lower inbound. There's maybe an SDR team compression, what have you. And so we're seeing a lot of organizations focus in on AE prospecting as a key initiative that maybe previously wasn't. And so making sure that, and then this kind of goes back to, setting expectations on it, setting goals on it, and then giving that visibility in that SLT meeting to say, hey, how are our teams doing? Like, are your teams doing the AE prospecting that they're supposed to be doing? And then potentially getting even down to the rep level. Like, because generally when you're deploying a new program, you're selling it internally. And so it's like, hey, here's this, here's the new program. Here's how we're going to go about it. Here's the goals associated with it. Oh, look, these reps right here are doing it. Yay. Woohoo. Right. And then you have like the metrics associated with that. And then of course, like you have the counter example where it's like these ones are not, right, but like they're in the same screenshot. You don't necessarily call them out, but it's like they're right there in the screenshot not doing it. So that would be an example. Same with like pipe hygiene stuff as well. Like, hey, you know what, we're really focusing in on making sure that we're working our ops very effectively, and we're going to measure that by untouched opportunity counts. And then like bringing that to the SLT level so that people are paying attention to that. Cool. So then the last section I want to talk about here, actually, before I do that, Mike, kind of any kind of commentary or feedback you might give on kind of like the implementation of key initiatives and kind of measurement thereof?
It's everything you hit on. Just make sure you're explaining the why and how it benefits them and have clear expectations and have people understand how you're going to track it.
Yep, for sure. For sure. Cool, man. Well, so I think that's all the time that we have for today. But Mike, this was super fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out. And folks, again, if you'd like if you'd like to grab one of our lovely sales nerd hoodies, we're just going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat. You're welcome to sign up for those. Sign up for one of those there. All we ask for is a quick chat on how you guys are using data to manage your teams and with one of our reps. So Mike, this is super awesome. Oh, hey, Angelica, anything else we need to cover?
No, definitely grab the hoodie. I have one. It's super comfy. And definitely sign up. I dropped the link again. Thank you, Mike and Pete, for that awesome session. Just a reminder for folks tuning in, the recording and key takeaways and presentation will be made available on the MSP website. So we'll see you there at the next event. And thank you again for attending.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
See ya.
Mike. Bye.